Okay, welcome. For folks on the line, folks are just filtering in, so we're going to give it a minute before we get started. Perfect. We're seeing folks filter in, and I just mentioned for folks on the line, we're going to be getting started in a minute. Okay, great. We're seeing folks filter in. I've mentioned we're going to be getting started in just a minute. Okay, we'll get started. So firstly, I want to welcome everybody to today's session. I'm Kellyanne Lahey. I'm the VP of Operations at Predictive Success. I want to start by saying that this session is the most requested session of webinars to date. We're absolutely jazzed that you can each be here with us today. We have an exciting jam-packed session. We have 90 minutes together, so we'll go through and dive into the science of dream teams. So with us today, we have Mike Zani, who's the CEO of Predictive Index, and we have Matt Pepsil, who's the godfather of talent optimization. Next slide, please. Great. So just before we get started, I just want to share our quick agenda. So we'll go into some brief introductions, and then we'll get into talking about the why behind Mike Zani's Wall Street Journal bestseller, The Science of Dream Teams. Followed by Matt Pepsil, who will talk about bringing these concepts into action with a new execution plan for talent. We have about 20 minutes for Q&A at the end of our session. I know some folks have submitted some questions, so we'll be sure to answer those questions then. At any point, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email my colleague Alyssa Shaver at ashaver@predictivesuccess.com. Next slide, please. So just some light housekeeping items before we get into our content. If you have any questions, please do use the Q&A box at the bottom rather than submitting questions via the chat function. Now, we've decided to keep the chat function open, so please share any insights or any observations as we go through. As a note, this session is being recorded, and we will share content at the end of this session. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Lahey, who's the CEO of Predictive Success, to get us started and share a more fulsome bio for each Matt and Mike. Over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Kellyanne. If you could advance the slide, just one slide, that'd be great. I'm really excited to be here today with all of you, and more importantly, to launch Dream Teams here in Canada. There's been a missing piece in PI for a number of years, and Mike Zani and Dr. Matt will talk about this new part of the Predictive Index suite. It really does tie into what we've heard across Canada, is the need to have teams that are performing at a new level. It's a new execution model, and it's really been accepted by the early adopters who brought in team discovery in a very high and profitable manner. So let me introduce my friend Mike first. Next slide, please. And so Mike is not only the CEO of the Predictive Index, he's got a Harvard MBA. He is very humble, but he should also be, I guess, patted on the back for being a coach of the U.S. Olympic sailing team to some success. He's had a great run in the past supporting companies, building companies, and in 5 years, he's taken Predictive Success to year-over-year growth that would rival any other, the fastest growing company in the assessment field. And with his leadership has invented a category called the talent optimization. Joining Mike today is Dr. Matt Pepsil, and Dr. Matt is an ex-Marine. He's got a PhD in leadership, and is really one that has taken the science of PI and studies leading teams. You're going to hear about improving business outcomes He's a worldwide expert in talent optimization, also an Ironman, and has written his own book as well. I'll finish off by saying that Mike's book, The Dream Teams, is now one of the nationwide bestseller on the Wall Street Journal. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to my good friend, Mike Zani. We'll give you a warm welcome.
Dave, thank you. It really is a privilege to be here with you and the Predictive Success team, you and Kellyanne and the rest of your consultants. Really, Predictive Success is such a fantastic partner of ours, our fastest growing partner, literally neck and neck, one of our largest partners, and I'm predicting overtaking our largest partner on the globe. And just wonderful to work with, and more importantly, and I would say most importantly, they do incredible work for their clients. So fortunate to be here with you today. You know, we're talking about our mission of better work, better world, and doing so through talent optimization. I hope to land this with you in our time today. It's really important. Talent optimization is a new discipline. It's a lifelong journey. I hope you join myself as well as Predictive Success on this journey with your own organizations, with your own people. And we'll dive into what is talent optimization. You know, talent optimization and my point of view on it. My business partner, Daniel Muskies, and I buy used companies with other people's money. We're actually on our fourth company. What you're looking at is the inside of a police car. In 2004, we purchased Law Enforcement Development Company, or LEDCO. We made a lot of the components that enabled that hardened computer and those rugged radios to survive. The console, the docking station, a lot of the articulating components. It's a pretty small niche company. You know, we were 32, 34 years old, fresh out of getting our Harvard MBA, snot-nosed kids, frankly. We really were probably a little full of ourselves. We knew enough about strategy to know what to do with this company for 5 years. We came up with a pretty good plan. We knew enough about finance to know what to pay for this company. We had a strong enough network that we were able to raise the $3 million of debt and the $3.5 million of equity in order to buy this company. Like I said, we did it with other people's money. At that point, all we had was debt to our name because we just got out of our MBA programs. Now, we did all sorts of due diligence before we bought this company. But what we missed, and we missed badly, and what they do not teach you at Harvard Business School is the people side of this business. On November 23rd, 2004 was our day one. We walked in, addressed the company on the manufacturing floor. We are your new owners. We are your new bosses. There were 45 sets of blinking eyes looking back at us. And they were always, all of them, to a person thinking about themselves, their me issues. Whenever a company transacts, gets bought or sold, employees start thinking, what about what's in it for me? Is this going to be better or worse? And we're looking back at them going, wow, this is exciting. We own a company. I hope we're going to be good managers for these people. But what we missed, and we missed badly in due diligence, the talent side of this. The 45 people who were there were not the people that we needed to execute our new strategy. They were the people that the old founder and the old owners needed to execute on the old strategy. But since we were changing strategy and taking a new tactic and a new path, these were not the people we needed. Only four out of those 45 people made it through our 5-year tenure of ownership. I'm not proud of those numbers because that's you know, having less than 10% sort of survive new ownership. But what we were in the midst of is changing the strategy and needing a new team to execute on this. Daniel and I realized we were not alone. Most CEOs are in this same conundrum that they don't have the people that they need to execute on their strategy. I like to say that every CEO has a strategy, some good, some bad. Most have a 1 to 5 year financial plan, which is supposed to underpin and support that strategy. Do we have enough capital to execute on the strategy? But tragically few actually have a strategic talent plan to execute on that strategy. If they do, it's typically boxes in Excel that says, I'm going to hire 5 people in Q1. It's not talking about how do we build a world-class team to execute on this strategy. So CEOs typically rely on human resources to get them out of this conundrum. And human resources, invented in the Industrial Revolution to protect companies against risk, are not in a position to help CEOs create world-class talent strategies. They were invented to protect companies against risk, and then almost every tool we've given them is tactical in nature. You give them an applicant tracking system, which takes candidate number 57 and marches them down a funnel until they get an offer, and then they go into an HR information system where they become employee number X, and it talks about open enrollment and have what benefits are they on. It's not telling leadership if they're a world-class member of a world-class team. They don't have the tools. It's not human resources' fault. Under-budgeted, understaffed, underappreciated, with, let's face it, the most deleted email in all of business. That is the status of HR. Most don't have a seat at the table. A few do, and it's not human resources' fault. I'm not trying to throw human resources under the bus. We have not given them that seat at the table. We have not given them the budget. We have not given them the tools. But worse than relying on human resources is when leadership, in their infinite wisdom, thinks they're really good at it. And they bring their own bias to bear, conscious and unconscious, where they hire people who they like. They don't hire someone who has a neck tattoo because they just can't get their arms around it. And they manage people the way they themselves want to be managed, not the way those people actually need to be managed. So CEOs are in this position. They're not getting the job done. Human resources doesn't have the seat at the table. Yet we have a huge problem because strategies don't execute themselves. People execute strategies. So I would like to introduce you to the discipline of talent optimization. I consider it the third leg of the stool. The first leg of the stool is corporate strategy in the domain of the CEO. The second is the financial plan. How do you afford that strategy? The third is the talent optimization plan. How do you execute that strategy with and through people? There is no company today, the way we're currently constructed, that can come up with a budget without having the CEO, the CFO, and the head people person in the room. Because most of the budget, 65% of a modern company's expenses are people related. How can you make a budget if you don't have 65% of the income statement represented? Talent optimization is going to take that business strategy and through a talent lens, get business results. Companies that don't get long-term business results don't get the honor or the privilege of staying in business. Now, this entire thing starts with design. What are you trying to build? What is the work that needs to be done? It's very different for different organizations. Are you a Subway franchisee, or are you a large enterprise doing manufacturing? The type of work is very different, and it starts with design. That informs who you hire, where you hire them from, how much you can pay them, and what pools you look at when looking for this type of talent. And it also informs how you inspire these people to greatness. You know, how much you're investing in them, how much are you able to influence? It's all out of the design. From that design, this entire thing is held together with a diagnostic tool. If you do the stuff in the middle well, consistently, over time, your diagnostic, your performance, your engagement, your happiness goes up over time. This is the discipline of talent optimization. I'm asking each and every person on this call to do something about this. Whether you, even if you're just an individual contributor, you get to manage up and across. You should make sure that all of your relationships are on a positive trajectory. And if you have a team, that you should be understanding, what is the work that I need to do? Who should I hire? How do I inspire them to greatness? And how do I know I'm doing a good job over time? I hope in 10 years, people look back and say, you know, we used to do unstructured interviewing with resumes, which is the greatest fiction in business. And we thought we were building world-class teams that way. And that's not how we're going to get it done. I would actually contend that talent optimization is in fact the Moneyball for business. Now, Moneyball was a movie. It was a book. You know, Brad Pitt played the hero. But more importantly, this was a movement. It was a movement. It started in baseball and it went to all sports. And this is when people are using data analytics to build world-class teams. 30 years ago, baseball scouts used to sit in stadiums like this, looking for the 5 tools of baseball, and they would have a pad of paper and a pencil and a stopwatch. And they would look for running ability, throwing ability, fielding ability, hitting for power, and hitting for average. And if you had those 5 tools, they would come to you and you'd say, kid, you're going to be a star. And 30 years ago, only 5 out of 100 people made it to the major leagues. Today, those same scouts don't go to stadiums. They sit in their own stadium looking at very critical data. They're looking at data trying to predict performance into the future. They're looking at on-base percentage. They're looking at spin rates of fastballs. And they're doing so because they operate under a salary cap. Many of them, they don't have unlimited budgets. Not everyone gets to be the Yankees or the LA Dodgers or the Boston Red Sox. No, most companies actually look more like the Milwaukee Brewers, where they have very tight budgets and they can't spend the money. So you're looking for what is the best talent for what I can spend. And that's what these scouts are now doing. And I will say that why this is talent optimization is the money ball for business. We need to build world-class teams. We are out there competing every day to execute on our strategy. So the question is, why are sports so far ahead of business? And they are 30 years ahead. Well, after a victory, whether you win or lose, the next day usually looks like this. But even the victors, they go watch film. They watch film not only of the past game to see what worked and what didn't. They often give kudos to those people who made outstanding game-saving plays, and they look critically at mistakes and things like penalties. But more importantly, they're looking at the next team, because even if you won the game, the strategy changes next week. The person you compete against next week is different than who you competed with last week. Last week, you might have gone against a team that was great at the running game. Next week, you might be going against a team with a great quarterback and a great passing game. You need to change the strategy. Businesses do not do this week to week. They're not swapping out personnel based on week to week strategies. And if you look at some sports, it's not just week to week, it's batter to batter. This famous image is of the manager giving the pitcher the hook. Thank you for your services, but you can go sit on the bench and we're going to give the ball to someone else. And they use data to predict this, but this does not happen in business. We put people into roles and we let them succeed there or fail there. But we're not coming out to them and said, give me the ball, you're done for the day. We're gonna let someone else do that. Sports are so far ahead of us with respect to building world-class teams, to being dynamic with their strategies, and being much more assertive and aggressive about moving their people, their most important asset, the actual product on the field, around. So our mission, and many of you may know this, of the Predictive Index, is better work, better world. But I talk about you, others, fit. It's about going on this journey. The first you part is becoming more self-aware as a leader. Being the best manager, being the best leader, being the best employee that you can be, understanding your strengths and weaknesses. It's also about others. It's making sure that you modify yourself to be with others, to be the best person you can be for them, to get the best out of them. And I often say a good teacher teaches the subject one way well. A great teacher will modify themselves for the student so that the student can learn. The same is true with managers. Great managers, great leaders modify themselves to get the most out of their employees. And they're varied. And then in the end, it's about fit. It's about fit with your job. It's about fit with your manager and your peers so you can communicate well together. It's about fit with your team. It's about fit with the culture of the organization. Because when you do you, others fit, you are creating better workplaces. We're sending home employees more energized by their work. You get better performance, you get more energetic employees and happier employees. But more importantly than that, people do not work to live. People live to work. People actually work to live. We want to send home people so they can be better spouses, better parents, better siblings, better members of their community. And today, the world needs community really badly. And it can start the work that we do as talent professionals, as leaders, as managers who care about talent. You wouldn't be here if you didn't care about talent. Creating better workplaces to create a better world using a system, the system of talent optimization. I encourage you to go on this journey. Now, I do want to share with you some talent optimization in practice. And Matt Pepsil is going to go into more detail, but I want to share with you some highlights. So we have used this competing values framework. This is a very popular strategic framework taught in business schools. And you can see on the horizontal, you have an axis of internal versus external. On the vertical, you have an axis of focused versus flexible. Now, using this competing values framework, I want to share with you businesses and cultures in each of these quadrants. In this upper right quadrant, you have this innovation and agility quadrant. These are companies like Uber, Airbnb, Tesla. They are trying to break old business models and recreate new ones. Sometimes, most of the time, without even knowing whether it's going to be a success or failure. They have a cultural orientation of creating. The style is about innovation, entrepreneurship, visionary, and they value doing things first. Now, this lower right quadrant, I know Canada has an incredibly healthy automotive industry. A lot of cars that are sold in the United States were actually built in Canada. The results in discipline quadrant is typified by the car industry. This is about fixed market share, and it's about making sure that your products and services are better than your competitors. This is the domain of using results and discipline to outcompete your competitors. You think about the auto industry, you're selling on miles per gallon or cargo capacity or towing capability. And it's about competing, selling, growing, and they value fast, developing things fast so you can bring it to market. In the lower left, the domain of process and precision. Think manufacturing, Six Sigma, 99.997% accurate. You're thinking banks, hospitals. This is also the domain of your coder rooms, people who are writing code. It's about control, coordination, monitoring, organizing. They're valuing doing things right and doing things right the first time. Now in the upper left, this is your teamwork and employee experience. This is the domain for a lot of not-for-profits. It's actually the domain of a lot of teams, sports teams, because where the whole is greater than the individual parts. It's about collaborating, facilitating, mentoring, developing, and engaging. And it's about valuing things done together. So this is the competing values framework. I go into this detail. I want you to try and remember these quadrants. The reason I go into this detail is we've worked very hard to map behavioral styles to this competing values framework so that we can know in a 6-minute behavioral assessment how you would map on this strategic framework and what people would see of you typically at work. Now, I want to share with you, this is a hospital team. This is a hospital team, Center of Excellence in Boston. It's not Mass General, but it could be. All the names have been changed. RE is the CEO. She is a female. The majority of her senior team is with her in process and precision. And we've got NW, who is the head of corporate development for this hospital. So if you think about a hospital, and I use this example because most of us can conjure the view of a hospital. Hospitals are governed by the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, which puts them into a risk intolerant stance, first do no harm. When you go to a hospital, there is a promise. They give you the right drugs at the right time, in the right dose, for the right reasons. And most hospitals are measured in outcomes. One hospital has a better outcome on XYZ procedure than the other, and that's the one you would prefer to go to if you were given that option. Hospitals are not about doing new cutting edge stuff. Now, there are divisions of hospitals that sometimes are, that might be associated with research and development. Now, poor NW is the corporate development person asking the hospital senior leadership, can we get into robotic surgery? Can we try a new process and procedure? Can we have more developmental studies to do X, Y, and Z? And often the senior team is like, no, it's not proven, no. But NW is probably one of the most important people on this team. They are challenging this senior team to think differently and outside of their comfort zone, because this person is showing them what's going to be coming down the pike next. So that is the hospital. They are a very good fit for their strategy. They're in process and precision, and probably should be, because they are a center of excellence hospital. Now, I would like to share with you a school system. Most of you can probably conjure a school system. In blue, I have labeled the teachers, and in orange, I have labeled the administrators. Now, they have a bimodal strategy. What is their strategy? Well, the teachers, they are getting students to go through team learning hour to hour, day to day, week to week, and they're trying to not let any child fall through the gaps. It is their job to help these kids matriculate through the curriculum, to go step by step, and if there is a problem, to capture it and intervene and do something. They don't have the luxury of looking really long term, where the administrators are thinking quarter to quarter, year to year. They're thinking to themselves, we have a very good STEM program, but we need better arts and humanities. If we can get our arts and humanities scores up, we'll get access to different state or local or federal funding, so that our school can outcompete those around them. Now, they both are a good fit for each respective strategy, but they're on the same team. And if you've ever seen a school system, the teachers sometimes don't respect the administrators, and the administrators don't always respect and understand the teachers. And the most important thing is, since they are good fits for their respective strategy and they have very real bimodal strategies, what we need to do with this team is use this data to coach them how to work better together, how to make sure that they modify themselves so they can understand the needs, the demands, and the challenges and the behaviors of the people in the different color. Because if we can do that, we can create a high-performing school system where the teachers can teach, the administrators can administer, and they can both achieve their goals and work harmoniously together, which is not always easy, but at least you have data which points at the problem. Now, Dave mentioned that I was a former sailing coach. I used to be a very competitive sailor, tried out for the 92 Olympics for Barcelona and coached in the 96 Olympics in Atlanta. A lot of my friends are still professional sailors. I have some friends who competed in the America's Cup. What you're looking at on your left is one of these newfangled America's Cup flying sailboats. These are foiling sailboats. They are going 50 knots on water. You can see they're all wearing helmets. These things are incredibly difficult to sail. There are two individuals, which I have labeled in orange. There is the driver, who is steering the boat. There is also the flight controller. The flight controller is operating the flaps on the wing that is supporting this boat. And those two have to work very well together. And unfortunately here, we have a driver and a flight controller on opposite ends of the spectrum. I've labeled in purple the coach. That was the first person to reach out to me. The coach came and said, I've got a driver who's frustrated with the flight controller. The flight controller, wants to do things one way. The driver wants to do things another way. So I sat down with this team and we talked about how it's going to take LM longer to feel comfortable flying the ship. In our case, like, just do it today, like innovation, agility. And TG is trying to outcompete the coach. And this team was on the verge of being totally dysfunctional. Yet we just needed to understand each other's differences at approaching something which is a common goal. They are quite literally in this boat together, trying to win something that is incredibly hard to do. And this coaching can be done. It's not just business. This is a high-performing sports team, with an annual budget of $100 million per annum. So I'd like to share with you our senior team. This is me in orange, MZ. This is my trusted business partner, DM. I mentioned we buy used companies with other people's money. We had the opportunity to buy the Predictive Index 7 years ago. It was a 60-year-old science company with mostly paper and pencil-based assessments. They had some software. It was pretty rudimentary. We were trying to reinvent this company, build software around it, unlock potential. to grow, to bring its products to the world, and we wanted to do so quickly. We felt there was a big opportunity. We started the category of talent optimization. The majority of our senior team was in innovation and agility. Now, the two most important people on this team are DM, my business partner Daniel, and Maribel Alvera, who is our head of operations. Daniel functions primarily as the inside person to my outside person. He functions a lot as the chief operating officer. Maribel is the head of operations. These two people are quite literally trying to keep the wheels on the company as everyone in the upper right is trying to go as fast and as agile to innovate as possible. So when we sit in meetings and this group, who is dangerously homogenous, starts cooking, we're birds of a feather, we flock together, we want to go fast, we want to be agile. Daniel and Maribel sit back and say, wait, have you thought about this? Show us in the data. Where's the proof? We need to make sure that our outliers on teams have voice, because they often are the ones who challenge us to think differently and better. Without Daniel, without Maribel, this team would be in trouble. I want to take a further example of that. You might say, why is PI so dangerously homogenous? This is the senior team. So I want to point out JD, Jackie Doobie. She's our head of talent optimization. She's a senior vice president. I've worked with her on talent for over 12 years. She is the best of the best. And I want to share with you her team. So I picked our people operations team. We still have JD in the same spot. This is the majority of her team, and you can see, not surprisingly, a lot of people are attracted to human resources. Broadly speaking, we call it people operations, but people are attracted to human resources in the teamwork and employee experience. These are collaborators. These are people who like to work together and do it as a whole and do it as a team. You can see, the majority of our team is here. We have a couple of people in results and discipline, the head of recruiting, and you can see some balance here, offsetting in results and discipline. But I wanted to share with you, this team actually has different work to be done than the senior team. The senior team is trying to reinvent an industry. We are trying to create a category. We're trying to create movement on a different, better way to do things around talent. Whereas this team internally is keeping the trains running on time from a people perspective, making sure we hire people, onboard people, review people, and make sure that the benefits and things that are very important, like pay, get done on time and accurately. So you can see, as you cut in different lenses of the organization, you can see different looks, and you can analyze these teams very critically. So mapping your own people, there is an opportunity through predictive success that you can take your behavioral assessment. If you haven't, you can map yourself under the competing values framework. If you actually are subscribed to the tools, you won't just get a general sense of where you are. You can find out exactly where you are and your teammates. But it is nice to know. You probably, if you've taken the assessment, you may remember your reference profile, which are labeled here. But I would encourage you, if you're going to use it as a scientifically validated tool, to actually dive in and get the better accuracy. And lastly, Dave mentioned the Science of Dream Teams, the book that I wrote. I wrote the first book on talent optimization. It will prove not to be the best book on talent optimization, but it is the first book on talent optimization. I'm in the upper right quadrant. I want to do things first. But more importantly than that, I tried to put a bunch of chapters together, the early chapters are why, and then there are later chapters on how, the details of hiring and onboarding and tools that you can use. It talks about a lot of different assessments in the appendix. But if you go to dreamteams.io, which is the book's website, you can read a sample chapter. You can learn about book clubs. You can actually take an assessment there as well. But I would encourage you to do the assessments through Predictive Success. That way you have better access to the repeatability of that data. And I share that with you in case you have some interest. And with that, I would like to hand it off to Dr. Matt Pepsil. He is one of the few PhD psychologists, Marine Ironmen I know, and he is in fact the godfather of talent optimization. Early on, he thought there was a different and better way to talk about the activities that we do to create a better work world through people. So Matt, I will stop sharing and let you share so you can drive your own slides.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. I'm going to share my screen. And if you could just tell me that you can see my slide, that would be great. Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, so awesome. We're going to talk a lot about how to design winning teams. I think Mike gave some great examples about how critical teamwork is, how much we've evolved in terms of going from, we use sports analogies, we have the business world. And so it's going to be all about winning teams. Now, we shared earlier the talent optimization framework, and what we're going to be talking about today in my section, and it really lands in that design module, that design aptitude. But it begs this question when we talk about talent optimization, what exactly is it that we're optimizing? And so what I want to make clear is that we're optimizing two really important things. We're optimizing the performance and the experience of individuals, teams, and organizations. One way to think about this, if I told you that an employee was high performing, but not having a great experience, you wouldn't be very comfortable with that as a business leader, because you would say, it's great that they're a top performer, but if they're unhappy, then they're at risk of leaving. And we see that happening today quite a bit, where individual employees are moving around organizations, et cetera. If I tell you they're having a great experience, but they're not performing all that well, then you're not sure that you want them to stay in the first place. Maybe if there's a bad fit, maybe you want to restructure their role. So we need both. When we think about individuals, teams, and entire organizations, if any part of that organization is not having the performance levels that we want, or if they're not having the experience they need and therefore are subject to risk or contaminating their teammates, then all of a sudden we see a situation that isn't optimal. And from Mike's talk, we know exactly that either the business results are going to be watered down, we're going to miss targets, or the strategy itself is going to be put at risk. So this is why talent optimization is the glue between the forward-looking strategy and the rearview mirror of the results. Many times when I talk to business leaders and they're frustrated by having either missed targets or there's some aspect of the strategy that they're not 100% convinced is going to work well, we find that it's a talent optimization gap that's at issue, because every business problem is a people problem. So let's take a look at this within the team context. In my experience in the modern organizations, team-based work is the most interesting and the most important type of work we do. That doesn't mean there aren't individual contributors who do amazing things and invent things, whatever it might be. But I think you'd agree, when you look at your organization, a lot of the complex work, a lot of the most value creating work is team-based work. Now, if we bring back the two dimensions that we're trying to optimize, we may have low performing teams or high performing teams. And in terms of experience, those team members could be having a positive one or a negative one. And so let's take a look at some examples where these things start to cross. If you have a low performing team, and those team members are also having an exceptionally negative experience, that is a toxic team. Not only are they not putting the results on the board, they're also having a bad time doing it, and they could potentially spill over to other teams that they're in close contact with. That is a big, big challenge. If we stay within this domain of the low performing team, let's contrast that with a positive team experience. This is a great time. You talk to this team, you say, how are things going? It's going great. You're like, are you creating any value? They're like, no, we're not. That's an issue too. And that's, you could call this type of a party team. If we switch over to a high performing team, we have lots of teams that are high performing, but the experience on that team is not great. I call that a grinding team. This is a team that's putting up results, but it's coming at a cost. And that cost, unfortunately, isn't something that's going to last forever. You're going to end up with a team member who's a high performer or a critical component of a high performing team who gets frustrated and who's going to leave. And clearly that leaves where we all want to be. We want to make sure that we have winning teams. They are high performing and those teams are having a positive experience. They're going to have a positive impact on those around them, and they're going to stay for the long haul. Now, here's my question to you. When you think about your own organization, you have gobs of teams. Even if you have 100 employees, you may have as many as 10, 12, 20 material teams. They could be cross-functional teams. They could be hierarchical teams, any types of teams. My question to you is, when you think about the teams, what percentage of your teams fall in one of these four categories? It's unlikely that they're 100% toxic teams, but it's also unlikely that they're 100% winning teams. The critical question is posed to the team leader. We need leaders at every level, like Mike said. And when you're a team leader, you probably don't have the training in some of the talent science and the people matters. Maybe you were promoted because you're a technical expert. If the team leader thinks, oh, we've got a winning team, would the senior leadership agree? Are the definitions of performance that clear that we would all agree that yes, that performance is high? If they're saying, yeah, everybody's having a great experience, would the team members agree? Or are they actually having a different experience? And in the context of the Great Resignation, they're actually off entertaining offers. and the team leader doesn't even know it. So the question is simply, where did the teams fall today? And knowing that we have a talent optimization opportunity, we can stack the deck in our favor and start pushing more and more of our teams into that winning category where we want all of our teams to be. Now, in order to do that, there's a methodology we have to use. There's a process we have to follow. How do we optimize talent? And it begins by collecting data. We have to take an empirical approach. Just because we're talking about people doesn't mean that things are completely variable. We don't just have to throw up our hands and be completely subjective and go by gut and all the things that we were trained to do. We can collect actual data and we can do it pretty easily. And we're going to take a look at an example of how. Once we have data in hand, we need to raise awareness. What is it that we have at play here? Mike showed us some examples that we saw in the layout of the different people of different team configurations that gave us awareness. We saw where people were close together, far apart. We saw distributions. The color coding really helped us with awareness. Once we have basic awareness, we can generate novel insights within context. We're going to talk about insights and different types of common business contexts that we're seeing and how better team science can help us optimize these teams. Finally, we have to take action. If things are going to get better, it's because we make them better. We have to have action that's guided and grounded in those insights. So this is the 4-step process that we're going to take when it comes to optimizing talent and creating these winning teams. Let's start when we think about collecting data. Now, when I think about explaining to clients what is the data that we need, I like to use a very simple and common analogy. Let's take the loonie as an example. And I say that there are 2 questions that are 2 sides of the same coin. And that is, what is the work to be done and who's doing the work? So as Mike showed us many examples of who's doing the work, we saw a very nice illustration of people in different situations and context and homogeneous teams, et cetera. And he talked a little bit about the work to be done as well. But what we can do is think about, why are these 2 questions so connected? And I give you the example of an org chart. If I ask you the question, when you think about your own org chart, is it made up of positions or is it made up of people? When you think about positions, if someone quits and they go to a different company, the position's still open. The work still needs to be done. So you might say that organizations are made up of positions. But at the same time, positions don't actually do work. People do work. You say, oh, that's Sally. She's accountable for that. You don't say that, the director of marketing is accountable for that. It's just not a common way of thinking about things. So again, I bring back a coin analogy. If you are in business, that means you're in the people business. And when you are in the people business, most of what you do when it comes to troubleshooting is going to come down to an issue of either clarity or alignment when it comes to what is the work to be done or who's doing the work. And it's no different when it comes to the team context, where we want to create those winning teams. Let's talk about awareness for a second. So when we think about what's the work to be done, Mike's already introduced us to the framework here. When we look at the 4 different quadrants as they relate to the competing values framework and to the PI behavioral science. But we now can bring in a new type of data, and that is the work to be done. If I tell you that a team is being asked to persuade customers or stakeholders to change opinions and behavior, you can think of a sales role. This is a very common priority for sales teams. That activity is associated with the innovation and agility quadrant. Now we know something about the work to be done. If we think about something like, I need a group of people, a team, to listen and serve others with empathy, maybe a customer service role, or maybe an internal liaison role. Mike shared the example of human resources role. Then teamwork and employee experience, that's the category and the quadrant that's associated with that strategic priority. Here's another one. When it comes to developing systems and organizing tools and resources for our teams, that is a process and precision item. And finally, when you think about results and discipline, how do we consider data? How do we inform our actions with that data and guide us in taking next steps, results, and discipline? So different strategic activities that we assign to teams can also be mapped to this framework. And that makes it very powerful when we want to create awareness. Here's an example. When we take that common sales technique or other technique of persuading customers or stakeholders, we illustrate that that's associated with this quadrant using this purple arc. And I'm going to show you some examples that use the purple arcs to give you a strategic emphasis of what a team is being asked to do. What's the work to be done? We can actually marry that with the earlier question of who's doing the work. This is me as an example. So I plot in this quadrant up here that is in the innovation agility quadrant. So now in terms of basic awareness, what happens is we've got myself, and I'm very closely associated with this, persuading customers or stakeholders. So my awareness would say, oh, that's good. If I'm being asked to do this thing, it comes very naturally to me. It's aligned with my needs and my preferences. So that work feels really good. Thank you very much. Please give me more of that type of work. You say, oh, Matt, I wasn't finished. I actually need you to do this type of work as well. Developing some systems, organizing tools. And I'm like, oh, okay. I'm actually not really well suited to that type of work at all. It's clear over there across this quadrant type model. So you can see how the basic awareness is very easy to read and really easy to understand when I take a comparison of where is the work to be done, where does it live, if you will, in this quadrant type model, and where am I? I'm who's doing the work, where do I live? And where am I similar to or different? Where might I need to stretch? Where am I a natural fit? Where do I balance either other individuals, as Mike showed us, or the work to be done? So that's how awareness of those two critical questions, what's the work to be done and who's doing the work, come together. Now let's take a look at some insights. Remember that insights is all about context. And what's happened over the last 18 months is that the context in which our businesses operate, in which our teams operate, in which we ourselves operate has changed dramatically. So we're going to take a look at some of the business trends and some of the recent developments through the lens of talent optimization. This is an example of hybrid teamwork. When we say hybrid teams, we're talking about the combination of people who work in an office environment and or people who work in a remote environment. Hybrid means both types of formats work together. So this is a team distribution. You can see it's fairly broadly distributed. This happens to be my team. I'm MP, I'm there in blue. And the color coding that you see here, you can see in the legend on the left, we use terms at PI that are called field, studio, and flow. Field means that an individual employee is 100% remote. They don't come in the office almost at all. Blue, studio, means they come in 3 or more days per week, each week, that they're on site physically here in the office as I am today. And flow in orange means it depends. If something's going on, they may come in a little more regularly, but they can also equally be remote. It's really a personal choice depending on what is happening on that given day. So this is a work format that's all about hybrid teams, and it's very, very common. We had thought that when the pandemic was going to come to an end and it was going to be safe to return to work, that everyone would naturally want to return to work. And that has absolutely not happened. I'm sure you are experiencing this yourself, depending on the industry you're in and the size of your organization, you may be experiencing this to greater or lesser degrees. But what we come to find is that the point I want to make here is that where I work, if I'm an employee, is a personal choice, not a personality choice. There are a lot of factors that go into a chosen work format: length of commute, socioeconomic conditions, do I have kids that I need to put onto Zoom school? Like all kinds of things go into it. But if we didn't think about it in the right way through this talent optimization lens, we might come to the wrong conclusions. Here's an example. You can see Kathy in the bottom left corner, CM. She is like me, blue, which means that we come to the office almost every day. But the difference here is that if I were to think, Kathy's coming to the office, she must be a social butterfly like me. She must want me to walk up to her unannounced and just start talking her ear off about whatever's going on in the business or in sports or whatever it might be. And that's absolutely not true. Kathy's what's known as a craftsperson. She's in that process and precision quadrant. She's a more reserved person. She needs a little bit more time and space and distance. If I were to interpret her choice of work format as if it were her personality, I would be doing the wrong thing for Kathy and frustrating her in the process. And thankfully, Kathy's worked for me for many years and would let me know that. If you look right next to me, overlapping with me, is Dottie, DL, in green. Dottie is in the field. She's 100% remote. So I must take that to interpret that she just doesn't want me to bother her. I should just leave her alone because she wants to be remote and just do her job with her quietly with her head down. No, absolutely not true. Her personality type is very much like mine. She is an extroverted person who needs that type of contact. So knowing that as I do, and using this type of a framework and the insights from the PI behavioral assessment, I know that I need to go out of my way because Dottie's remote. I need to reach out to her using communication tools like Slack and the mobile phone and just constantly making sure that she knows that I care about her, that I'm thinking about her. Because now all of a sudden her choice to work field had nothing to do with her personality. It may actually pain her not to come to the office more, but there could be a variety of reasons why she makes that choice. So again, where an employee chooses to work as a personal choice and not a personality choice. And now that we have a view of a talent optimization lens, we can make better choices about our teams. Here's something that I know is gripping Canada and many industries, and that's the labor shortage. When your candidates are in short supply, you have to be extremely surgical about the candidates who you do have, who you are considering for work. It was hard enough to get them to apply for the job. Now we have to make the right hiring decision. Here we can see an innovative team who's doing innovative work, but there's also the need to do results and discipline work where we currently have a gap. Good news is we're making a hire. If I were to say these are the 3 candidates who were able to move through the process in a labor shortage environment, we again have to be that much more surgical about it. Without the benefit of this type of insight, when candidate A comes in, the interview team is going to say, I love candidate A. Why? Because they're just like me. The conversation flowed so smoothly. They were into big ideas just like me. Holy cow, this was great. Doesn't mean that's the right hire. You have to consider what's the work to be done. Where do we have our gap? If we go with candidate B, they seem like they were a great team player, but they're not going to give us what we need. When I look at candidate C, a couple of things are going to happen. The interview is going to feel a little different than with candidate A, but the skill set and the role that they're going to fulfill is going to complement our team. New team member, new team. I'm going to pull out all the stops if this candidate is the right candidate for all the other reasons. It's a holistic decision, but this is going to be the candidate who balances the team. If I'm in people operations or HR or I'm a talent optimizer and I'm advising this interview team, I'm making them aware ahead of time. Now, look, this person's not like you. That's a good thing. They're going to be this. They're going to be diligent. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to be all these types of things. And they're going to be data driven. They're going to be focused on results. They're not going to be as social as you are as an interview team. I can pre-wire and make sure that they're going to make the right choice and don't let bias accidentally slip in. So this is, again, in a labor shortage environment where we really want to be focused on candidates who are going to fulfill the mission. And I may have to pull out all the stops because candidates are hard to come by right now. So that's an indication to me that when I get somebody who's a fit to the mission and I get the team to understand how they're going to complement the team, then all of a sudden I know I can lean hard on getting a yes to that employment offer. Here's an example around competing styles. So I see this very commonly in many industries, including software development, technology, et cetera, where you start to see a group of people in the top right, innovation and agility, who are about the next big thing. We want digital transformation. We want to invent. We want to embrace future revenue streams. We are go, go, go. And that's great. And that's a part of what teams need to do to revitalize and to stay healthy and to always be looking at the next sales innovation, the next technology innovation, because if we stagnate, we're going to perish. However, when there's an existing book of business, an installed base, thousands or millions of users who expect quality, now we need process and precision. So we hire people into our quality assurance roles who are process and precision people, and we assign them process and precision work. What that creates is, just as it says, competing styles, where all of a sudden we're frustrating one another. And that's also because we have these competing goals. So I'm incenting my innovation agility people about coming up with the next new thing and trying and failing and skinning our knees and all these great things that we say, but I'm not necessarily reconciling the fact that I have different people in the organization who are being paid and who are being judged in terms of their job performance based on quality outcomes. Let's have fewer defects. Let's have more accurate shipments. When these things are metrics that we want to manage to, then all of a sudden we have two groups that are working in opposition. And that's important because that's sometimes necessary in organizations. But if we do it without the benefit of this type of visibility and this type of education and counseling that happens across these two disparate groups, then we get bumper cars, then we get friction. We can have all kinds of issues that result when these types of things, when we lack the awareness, when we lack the insight, as we're looking at today. Here's another example where we think about the Great Resignation. In this case, you can see the strategy. I always like to start with the work to be done. It's a fairly balanced strategy. It covers 3 of the quadrants in relatively equal amounts. And we've got a team dispersed around, so we've got the work covered, which is good. When you look at green, green means good to go. I'm talking to the team leader in purple and I said, how are your people? I said, these three are good to go. I've had conversations with them recently. I'm clear on their compensation. Everything's fine. They're not going anywhere. You know, I looked them in the eye and I asked them how they were doing. I feel good about these three. You say, interesting. Talk to me about this orange person on the fence. Well, I haven't done a compensation review for this person in the last 18 months. Really, that's a long time. Well, this is something that we need to figure out. How do we move this to action? How do we start to make sure to shore up somebody? Because if we've got innovation and agility work that we're counting on and they're on the fence, there's some potential risk there. But what's really got my attention is red. Process and precision, this person's at risk. Why do you say this person's at risk? Well, they're part of a division and they report to a group and they're on my team, but they report to another group and they've had a lot of turnover over there. They're probably a little loose in the socket. They're probably a little concerned about job security. They may be looking. Interesting. You're the team leader. You have somebody on the team who may be looking, and they're the only one who's naturally aligned with one key aspect of your work, which is process and precision work, right? How many of your team leaders in your organization do you think can produce a chart like this and give you a clear lay of the land about where people are relative to the work we're counting on them to do? Versus how many are going to say, yep, so-and-so quit on me. I need to open up a rec. You need to open a rec. It's going to take us time to find somebody. Then we got to onboard and ramp them. And then, you know, the metrics that you were counting on or the deliverables that you were counting on are now that much more at risk. And it just doesn't get any better downstream. So we have the process, we have the tools, and we have to hold our leaders accountable. We have to equip them, but we have to hold them accountable for being able to communicate to us in terms of talent. They are technical business leaders who got promoted for those reasons. In many cases, we can't overlook the people part. Otherwise, we're going to get those nasty surprises. So those are some examples when it comes to the insights and how we can marry up work situations and themes that we're seeing with the work to be done and who's doing the work. But when it comes time to take action, we might feel like, well, what can I do? There are some very specific things we can do. And that's what I'd like to talk about in my final section here. When you take a look at a team like this, this is a very common scenario, and it's not a problem. When you see a gap like this, what I call a talent gap, it's not a problem at all. It's, again, very common, not a problem. We have a team that I would call a pathfinding team in that everyone is stacked on the right-hand side of this graph. If you look at the green dots, I always start with the strategy arc. So again, we have that balanced strategy we looked at a little bit earlier. But in this case, we know we have over in the process and precision quadrant, a strategic priority around implementing new systems and processes, critical to this team's success, yet nobody's naturally suited to do that type of work. And that's what gives us that gap. Clearly visible. You could show this chart to anybody in your company and they'd say, oh, that looks like a gap to me. And they're like, yeah, you'd be right. So here's the question. What happens if we don't fix that gap, if we don't address it? Well, the first is strategy risk. Things we're counting on happening for this team, materializing over the next 12, 15, 18 months are at risk. The team leader is going to be rolling around a little bit at night thinking, geez, I don't know if we're going to be able to pull this off. And that's a problem. The other, though, could be missed targets. If we don't implement the systems and processes, it's going to show up in our numbers. We're going to have a dashboard somewhere in the business that we were hoping to see green, but instead we see red or yellow. And that's absolutely what happens. And again, every business problem is a people problem. The final, though, is this people tax. There could be frustration, there could be stress, there could be more of the internal meetings, and now I'm having more one-on-ones to deal with problems in the business if I don't get this gap fixed. There's that friction, that frustration really adds up to a tax that we're paying. We're paying it every day in our organizations, and it may not show up directly on the balance sheet, but it's there. And it's weighing down the profit potential of our companies if we allow people tax to fester. So we don't want that to happen. So what do we do? What actions can we take to close the gap? There's three questions I like to ask, and I'll start with this first one with who's in the room? Let's just focus on the green dots of people who are actually on the team. As the team leader, what choices do I have? The first is I can coach. I can coach individuals on the team, maybe somebody in that bottom right quadrant who's already relatively close to process and precision through my coaching and creating goals, helping them develop options, really helping them settle in on actions they can take to take on this initiative. That might be something as a leader I can do, is I can coach them up to be able to stretch a little bit and cover off on a gap. That's a good option. Another option, though, might be training. Can I send them to a project management course? Can I send them to a certificate program? Do we have a corporate learning environment where we can start to talk about ways that they could get some education, secondary wise, to be able to up their skill set? People in the room can do those things. They're not fixed. It's not that we can't stretch or learn new skills, but we have to be deliberate about it. We have to do it intentionally based on the gaps that we see. The second question I ask is, who's in the building? I like to say, who's on the payroll already? Who else is already here inside the organization who could potentially help us in one of three ways? The first is we could develop somebody who's a little more junior than this team's current level, but maybe if they're high potential enough, can we develop them to be able to play and participate at the level of this team? And then we can name them onto this team. That would be pretty fantastic. Well, what about borrow? Maybe I don't need somebody to do this full time. Maybe there's somebody who is interested in career advancement, access to other types of projects in the organization. Maybe I could borrow a natural process and precision skill set from somebody, hopefully not Kathy from my team, but somebody who's naturally suited to do that type of work could come over and help us on a temporary basis, a part-time basis, and we could just borrow that skill set. The other is potentially partner up. Maybe there's a systems or process-oriented part of the organization who's already doing all of their own work, unrelated to mine, but I can convince them to make room on their execution plan to help me with something where I currently have a gap. If they have some amount of discretionary effort that they can place towards helping other business units succeed, that might be something that works. And certainly at PI, we do this all the time. But again, the point is, let's be intentional and deliberate when we have opportunities that even within the building, I don't have to go outside, I can get the problem solved, I can get the gap filled. And finally, the last question I like to ask is, who's on the street? Here we're talking about people who are outside the organization currently, but I can bring them in some capacity to close a gap. Obviously, make a hire that's situated in that quadrant. The first and most straightforward, obviously, is hire. If I have a chance to interview candidates, I can open up a job requisition, I can make a hire. I know where I'd want the hire to go on this team, all things being equal. I'm going to want somebody from process and precision. And I'm prepared as the team leader to say, new team member, new team. Now we're going to take on somebody who's a little bit more reserved, a little more by the book, a little bit more focused on details and execution, who wants to make sure that we've systematized parts of our world. That's going to change the team dynamic, but it's critical for us to have a balanced team to pursue our balanced strategy. There may also be opportunities to contract, whether it's the gig economy and other types of part-time work is really exploding, especially in light of some of the freedoms that people have in terms of where they work. The pandemic has really loosened some people to become consultants. The consulting industry is booming. Maybe I can find someone on a contract basis. So I don't even have to make a full-time hire, but I can complement my team and extend it in that way to be able to cover off on that gap. Now, the reason I've been positioning all of this under the guise of the team leader is that talent optimization itself is a leadership discipline. It is a leadership framework, and it is up to the chief executives and the entire senior leadership team to make sure that the philosophy of talent optimization is present and pushed through the organization at every level. Just as Mike led off his talk, where he and Daniel made talent optimization a priority back in 2004 at Ledco, the very first company they operated, had the good sense to make talent optimization the philosophy before it even existed as a discipline. Just instinctively, they did that. For HR business partners like Jackie, who Mike shared with us a little bit earlier, it's how do you partner up with your business leaders and your team leaders to make sure they're taking a talent optimization approach? But it is the accountability and the domain of a team leader to get talent optimization right. If they manage people, they are in the people business, and therefore they may need to make people a priority. To do that, they need the data. They need the visibility and the tools that allow them to create awareness. They need help to generate the insights of what this means in their context, and they need help deciding on which actions they can take to cover off on any gaps, but it is their responsibility. And that's why I'd like to finish with this famous quote from W. Edwards Deming: if you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. And the reason I say that is because we've talked today about how to design winning teams. It is a process. We've laid out a very clear 4-step process that every team leader can take with the right support and the right help, like that provided from Predictive Success. And I think that we want to make sure that these team leaders are well positioned to drive the talent optimization capability from within their team if we're going to get the business results we want, and we're going to protect that strategy that we care so much about. All right. That was it. Thank you so much, Kellyanne. I think we are ready for questions and answer, which is absolutely Mike and I's favorite part of the entire webinar.
Yes, awesome. As we're going, I'm thinking, talent optimization is a complete priority. And I love that you both touched on that it's everyone's responsibility. Better work, better world. So like you said, Matt, now is the portion, the Q&A portion. Now we have a couple questions submitted through the chat or through the Q&A box. We have about 9 questions that were emailed in advance. So I just want to give folks an opportunity to submit your questions if you have not done so already using the Q&A box at the bottom. But while folks are doing so, I'd like to get started with a question that was submitted by Lanny. Now, this is not focused specifically on team discovery, but I think a good question. So Lanny, some of us certified PI analysts have moved to new organizations that believe in talent optimization, but are not sold on the investment. What is the most impactful statement you suggest to a CEO or decision maker on why they should consider investing in PI and its suite of capabilities?
Kellyanne, I can jump in on this. I asked Lanny a question in the chat, like how many employees he had, just to get a sense of the size of the organization. And it's interesting, Lanny, if you're principally using the software, well, first of all, if your CEO doesn't see value, they haven't bought into talent optimization. They're sort of in the old school way, is my guess. So you're trying to win them over with, you can try winning over their hearts and minds by, attending something like this. But if you're trying to do it on a pure ROI capability, if you use it pre-hire, given the size of your organization, I'll make an assumption about what the cost would be. If you prevented one bad hire, just one bad hire, even if it was a junior hire, you would more than pay for an annual subscription. And if you're using it post-hire, I took just a number divided by the number of employees you have, and you might be looking at somewhere between $5 and $20 per employee per month. And to give people the power of the tools of better communication, making sure that their team dynamics are well spot out and thought out and mapped to their strategy. The question is, most CEOs, if you thought, is that worth $5 or $10 a month per person to make sure my teams are working on the right work and working cleanly and efficiently? So it is difficult. I feel for you, Lanny, because when you have unenlightened leadership who hasn't bought into investing in their people, it's difficult, because they view it as a cost. Why are we spending this money? Versus, if I went to the recruiters, the scouts in baseball and be like, hey, you can't use any data to pick players, they'd leave teams. They're just like, all right, I'm going to a new team. And I really feel if you have unenlightened leadership, it's sort of like, and you've tried every tactic. At some point, you're like, if you are a human resources professional, life's better if you actually work for enlightened leadership. And if you can't change, it's a great job environment. You should work for a place that really believes in it, because doing the work is so enjoyable and you can make such a huge impact on their lives.
I'll just add to that by saying I think a lot of it comes down to framing. Business people think in business terms. And so we want to speak to business leaders in business terms. And the reality is that when you think about people problems, they get very expensive in business terms very quickly. So my advice is always follow the money. If you take a look at any of those metrics that are off, red, yellow, and you want them to be green, something that's not adding up in the business, then let's just follow that trail, because you're going to find a talent optimization gap on the other side of it. When you think about it, we would never manage sales, warehousing, any other part of the business the way we manage people, where we just don't have the right data to do the job. And I think if you're looking to provide a return on an investment, you're not going to find things that produce a higher ROI than taking a talent optimization approach with the people. But again, it has to be cast in the light of the business result. So that's what I would recommend as well.
And I'll just chip in a little bit. I mean, this CEO would not blink by spending money on insurance for fire on his buildings, but what is the insurance on his people? And what is he doing to prevent people from leaving? As Dr. Matt said, the best candidate is the candidate in the job and performing. But what are they doing to equip the managers to be better at their job in 2022?
Great, thank you. The next question, What are strategies you can use to optimize a retained org or a newly formed team following an M&A? You don't get to swap out or pivot resources, or you've had to work with what you have due to financial or legal constraints. Do you have some interim best practices?
Yeah, Charlotte, I've great question, and M&A is always difficult. One axiom that I've thought about with M&A, and I've done a lot of M&A. We bought a lot of companies. We've done tuck-in acquisitions. Typically with mergers and acquisitions, it's either better for you or worse. It's rarely the same. And it's really important to have a sense of who it's better for and who it's worse for, because you really have to that's your first triage. But I did use the predictive index back when I was a client in 2009. Our company was purchased and I was in charge of the post-merger integration. And I used the predictive index before we had tools like team discovery. And what you can, we use some of these techniques to find out, like, there are constraints. It's difficult to pivot resources quickly. You don't want to blow the budget by needing to spend a lot more. But I think with these new tools, team discovery, when Matt was showing you gaps and opportunities and how to train and stretch and get people to temporary fill gaps, maybe some internal jockeying that you can do. Or if you go back to my school example, where they're different and you just coach them to work together, because both of their differences are valid, that I think you can go a long way. I think, a year into M&A, these things start loosening up. You do need to find out, are people going to make it, or do we need to find new resources? And they've already, you're no longer at risk of them leaving. In M&A, one of your risks is you think the whole new team that was the acquired company might just bolt. But after you've learned the business for a year, you're less concerned about that. But it is some of the tools that I would approach, not from a dysfunctional team perspective, but a team that needs investment perspective.
I'll give you a quick example of that as well. So I was part of a software company and we were innovation agility type quadrant, and we had built some amazing new technology, and we were acquired by a company that was a process and discipline quadrant, big mega company, and that happens. And so they bought this company, my new company, because it was innovation, and then they wanted to bring us in and revitalize their sleepy sales by taking on this new tech. Well, somebody had sent the most process and precision email I've ever seen in my life. It told us that they had been monitoring the level of milk consumption in our kitchen, and that we had been consuming more milk than was allowed. Milk was intended for cereal, but they suspected people were drinking the milk. And all of a sudden, it was the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Anybody who was an innovation agility person was like, this is ridiculous, I'm leaving. So millions of dollars of intellectual capital, eventually through things like that, walked out the door. And I doubt that we were spending millions of dollars on milk.
Good stuff, thank you. And the third question, there are several tools and approaches that help with building better team dynamics. What would be the 2 or 3 key points that differentiates PI from the rest?
Matt, did you want to take that? You want me to take that? I'll take the lead on this one. I think I see a lot of team building tools and a lot of team bonding and team sort of camaraderie type stuff, and I enjoy them very much. But I think that I haven't seen many that have this done within the context of the work. Talent optimization, one of the things I love about it the most is it puts equal footing on the business side and the people side. What's the work to be done and who's doing the work? So I think when you start looking at team dynamics in isolation, you may be led to the wrong conclusion. When you look at team dynamics also within the context of the business, as we've been doing today, it's a game changer, fundamentally different. So I'd say on that basis alone, PI, our workshops, the types of tooling, the reporting you can get out of it, stand in stark contrast to a lot of other types of approaches that I see training companies, assessment companies, et cetera, take as if the business didn't exist because they just don't know to go there.
Oh, go ahead, please, Dave. Please.
So recently we were working with a retail meat company, and the HR team was having a challenging time. The sales team was not performing where they should be. And what was a great visual is when we ran team discovery and all of the salespeople were in the top left quadrant in the teamwork, and we had no innovators. That great visual the CEO's thoughts right back to me. Wow, that visual tells me where I need to go in 2022. So the visuals and the link towards a better conversation with your executives really give HR and also company leaders a strategic view to the future, and that's worth thousands of dollars. That's a big differentiator between, I know you can't do that with Disc or Caliber, and one of the big reasons why this additional insight is a digital dashboard on mapping strategy to people. It's a game changer.
When in order, I put in the appendix of the book Science of Dream Teams a bunch of tables about all the different assessments, their pros and cons. Some of them might be a perfect fit for what you have to do. When I wrote the book on talent optimization, I didn't want it to be overly biased on PI. There are solid tools out there that you should look at, consider, some better for pre-hire, some better for post. So encourage you to look at that. I tried to be as unbiased as possible. I actually had IO psychologist who didn't work at the Predictive Index review it to make sure that it was a straight up look on trying on objectivity with that. So hopefully, Neil, if you wanted to look at that, you might be able to. And it's not a short answer.
Okay. Our next question is from Michael. Can team discovery receive pro, so job assessment inputs along with individual inputs? This will help discover team gaps.
So the pro, as it was formerly known, the PI job assessment is really about an individual job. Team discovery is obviously about the team in context. So it's a little bit of a next order or composite level goals for the team. That's not to say they don't work together. They certainly do. But I think that when we are looking at team discovery, we're looking at what's the team collectively being asked to do in terms of shared goals. That's what makes teams teams. So there's a lot of similarities between the two. And one example, like when we saw the gap as an example in my last, and we said we could make a hire, we absolutely would want to use the job assessment there to make sure we got the target right of somebody who's really strong and is going to end up landing in that process and discipline position. So there's definitely a way that they connect to one another, but I just wanted to clarify the difference between composite team objectives versus job objectives. They operate at a little bit of a more granular level.
One client who's just started using this, actually, Michael, called the strategy bars that Matt showed as the strategy pro. I thought that was a good comparison. Yeah. So old school, new school, but again, the strategy, when they align to where the people are, is so important, and it's now available in team discovery.
We have a question that has filtered in via DM. I actually have a couple on the same topic about the ROI of team discovery. So can you share any ROI examples of where team discovery had a real playback to the company?
I can share my internal benchmark that I always target a 10x ROI. So what that means is that if I'm going to recommend to a client that they purchase a design team or a workshop that utilizes team discovery, for example, I want to see a business impact of 10x that in terms of what's at stake. And again, I said it earlier, with talent, it is not hard to get to that number very quickly. We have to just remember how expensive people issues are in organizations. A lot of times it's because we don't do the math on it. But if I start to see, like, go down the process of, you're an internal consultant and you're trying to work with one of your teams, and you're like, well, what's happening? Well, orders are shipping late. Okay, how often does that happen? What's at stake when an order is late? And you start doing all that math, and you come to run the team discovery and come to realize that you're missing people who are those natural, disciplined people who are systematic in their approach. And maybe the team has other skills that they're crushing, but this one is the gap. You're going to find that that's the ROI that you're going to want to chase after and say, okay, if we either coach, because it doesn't always mean making a hire, but if we can coach and cover off on these things, we raise awareness, we generate the insights, we take the action, we actually execute the action plan to get people the exposure, the skills, the mindset that they need to do this type of discipline work, we can reduce those defects, get those orders out on time, whatever it is, you're going to get that type of return. So 10x is my internal benchmark, and I haven't been disappointed, and I certainly don't disappoint my clients.
Okay, great. And a question was submitted in the chat function. Can you comment on the total M score and emotional energy and capacity to multitask? How do you consider it, particularly as roles get more senior?
Yeah, Gerard, that's an interesting question. By the nature of that score, or that question, my guess is you were trained well, probably more than 7 years ago, and we were doing a lot of validity work on what M score means. It used to be taught that M score was a measure of energy. Higher M score, more energy, more stimulated. Lower M score, less energy. Yes, 30 plus years ago. So we did a lot of work on that. Now, oftentimes, high M score does mean, more stimulated, high energy, but low M score does not always mean less energy, which is interesting because you're like, it's not a linear correlation. Low M scores can be people are very critical of themselves and they only check words that they really felt were a 100% pick. Low M scores could mean someone was actually taking it in a very tired state or distracted state. Low M scores could mean that people are skeptical and don't want to give you information. So I think it's dangerous to read too much into M score. And for those of you who don't even know what M score is the number of adjectives that you checked on each question and collectively. So it 30 years ago when you were taught, it was a powerful tool, and they talked about energy, and I think it has some light correlation to that, but it's not a tight enough correlation that we teach it as dogma today.
One thing I will say is that we're certainly seeing that the most successful organizations are those that have the capacity to change. And that's less related to M score as it is to team configurations, mindset, the way that we introduce change. So I think that there are some very powerful things happening, obviously, in the environment that are not going away. And a lot of the coaching that I provide to clients today is about how do we increase the capacity to change within our teams? How do we make sure that we're able to embrace what's becoming known as optionality, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen socially, economically, from a health perspective, whatever it might be. And I think that capacity and energy levels have been tested. So even some of the historic observations you have, even about an individual team member who seems to always come to work super positive, they may be languishing right now, to use a psychological term. Everything is sort of up in the air. So I just urge checking with your people. Definitely look at it on a case-by-case basis to the extent that you're able. There's some pretty heavy stuff happening inside all of our organizations right now.
And one last note on that is I would also think that dovetailing in the cognitive is important. I mean, that learning agility can really help you with senior leaders. As long as it's launched properly and not as a weapon, it can really help us understand capacity and capacity for change and capacity for learning new items and role.
Okay, so we probably have time for one more question, but before we do, I'm receiving a couple comments and questions privately about the recording. So as a note to everybody, this session is recorded and you will have access to the content. So the last question is probably for you, Matt, about hybrid teams. Matt, I'm interested in learning more about hybrid teams. Do you anticipate keeping this model with field studio flow employees? As we move away from the pandemic, do you think this is really the future of work? Is the model giving people the preference here to stay?
I think the short answer is absolutely. I think that work preferences will continue to evolve, but I'm certainly not counseling any of my clients now to look at enforcing a return to work policy anytime soon. The reality is that people have gotten it accelerated what was already starting to happen a little bit more slowly, which is a move toward hybrid work. And I've gone on record as saying that hybrid work is the most dangerous work format we've ever seen, because before the pandemic, we were largely together in offices. During the pandemic, we sent everybody home that we could to be safe, and everybody had equity because they were on a level playing field of being remote. And we just translated some of our historic practices. Now you got 5 in the room, 5 on the Zoom, and it's different. It's just doggone different. So the reality is, just to answer the question, yeah, it's here to stay. I'm not aware, Mike, you know as well as I, we're not talking about enforcing people coming back. We want to give our employees the choice. We want them to be healthy and happy. Even when the pandemic does whatever it's going to do and completely goes away, however long that's going to take, I think hybrid work is here to stay. Absolutely. That's my view.
Yeah, it's definitely not. the genie is not going back in the bottle. Absolutely not. I actually think it's going to continue accelerating, and the new normal, it has going to look nothing like the old way of doing things. And people are really enjoying their the time that they're not spending in cars. They're enjoying less distractions. Companies are able to diversify their workforce more easily because they're not looking in geographic locations, which may be more homogenous. So I think we're going to see new things like, what about time zones? Because I don't even have to live on the East Coast. You know,
No.
the South Pacific sounds pretty good to me as
There
we
you go.
enter winter. So, you know, there are going to be things that we're going to have to manage that are going to be much more difficult. So this future of work is going to be interesting. And, you know, some people might say, why aren't I living in a country which has 1/10 the cost of living? So we're going to see a lot of pressures on this in the future, and it's just the beginning.
And on the employer side, remember, it's an opportunity and a threat. The threat is that some of your existing workers that you could count on because you were the best game in town locally now have choices. And that is something you have to contend with. But it's also an opportunity because it can open up your candidate pool. You can get more diverse candidates. There's all kinds of great things that can happen if you make talent optimization foundational to your hybrid work approach. It can work. It absolutely can work. We're succeeding with it, and you can too.
And
Awesome.
I think it could be a huge win for Canada. So as the United States implodes by fighting each other internally, you guys could be a great destination for a lot of people looking for a safe haven of normalcy.
So you
Or
got that
maybe I
going
should
for
say
you.
more normalcy. And hybrid work will mean we can kind of work for similar companies.
Totally. Getting much more creative. I love it. So that concludes the Q&A portion. Now, I have received a couple questions we did not have the opportunity to address. So we'll take those offline. And if you do have questions after this session, please feel free to email Alyssa Shaver, and she'll answer your question or find the right person to do so. If we can just go to the next slide, just so folks have access to Alyssa's email address.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's me. There we go.
Perfect. Now, everybody on the call today will receive one team discovery session, so you can email Alyssa to get that set up. And then 10 folks will have the opportunity to receive a copy of the Science of Dream Teams. So we'll reach out to the first 10 folks who registered for the session. I'll turn it over to Dave to share some concluding thoughts, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for attending. It was huge for us to have so many of our clients and future clients to share the time on Dream Teams. I hope you found it rewarding. I certainly did. Mike's book, if you haven't got it, is a great Christmas gift, but it's certainly got some great insights for your hiring managers, for your line managers, supervisors. And if you haven't thought about talent optimization, whether you use the Predictive Index or DISC or Caliber, it is absolutely going to be a game changer in the challenges we have here in Canada for optimizing talent and using talent to execute on your CEO's vision. Keep in mind that the CEO's number one or number two challenge is talent. It's never been higher on their radar. And if you're in the HR business or if you're in the line business, you know, I get pleased and jazzed when I see you guys get promotions on your LinkedIn profiles by bringing in the TO solution or Predictive Index. We're here to help you. Our mission and vision is aligned with Boston, and that we really truly believe that better work will lead to a better world across Canada. And we want to thank Mike Zani very much and Matt, Dr. Matt, for giving us time today, an hour and a half, and I'll just give them a round of applause. And I want to thank Alyssa for organizing this. Thank you very much. Just went off well. And thank you, Kellyanne, for being our moderator today. So I salute you all, wish you a great evening, and we're happy to have you as clients. Thank you for your business.
Thank you all.
Thank you
Great
for having
session.
us.
Well run. Thank you.